Rachel Torres was the devoted California mother who seemed to have it all. And Daniel Torres was the polished husband admired by neighbors, but behind their picture-perfect image lay secrets so dangerous that one would end up buried in a shallow grave and the other would stand accused of murder. Rachel Torres was known as a devoted mother and a familiar face in her California neighborhood. On weekday mornings, neighbors often saw her jogging through the tree-lined streets before starting her day. She was consistent, almost predictable, which is why her sudden disappearance sent a ripple of unease through the quiet suburb. On the morning she vanished, she laced up her running shoes as usual and stepped out into the cool dawn air. It was supposed to be a short jog through the local park, a routine she had followed countless times. Hours later, her absence began to feel unusual, then alarming. Her two children, who expected her to pick them up from school later that afternoon, waited outside anxiously. Teachers called her phone, which went straight to voicemail. By evening, her husband reported her missing. That single phone call marked the start of a case that would grip the entire community. Search teams fanned out across the area, volunteers combed through hiking trails, drainage ditches, and parking lots. Helicopters circled overhead while officers used dogs to pick up a trail. But it was as if Rachel had stepped off the earth and vanished into thin air. Detectives quickly learned that nothing in her home suggested she had planned to leave. Her purse, wallet, and phone were still inside. Laundry sat folded on the couch. A meal was defrosting on the counter, as if she expected to be back in a few hours. Nothing pointed to a woman abandoning her life. Instead, it pointed to someone who intended to return. That made her sudden disappearance more unsettling. Local news stations picked up the story almost immediately, broadcasting her smiling face across the evening headlines. The media described her as a beloved member of the community, a mother whose absence left her children in the care of confused relatives. Each day, more people joined the search, but with each passing hour, hope dimmed. Investigators interviewed those closest to her, starting with her husband, Daniel. He told officers that Rachel often jogged alone and had never expressed fear for her safety. He insisted she had no enemies, no reason to run away. But detectives noticed small inconsistencies in his account of the day she vanished. He seemed calm, almost too calm, as though the crisis unfolding around him was happening to someone else. At that point, however, there was little evidence to suggest wrongdoing. The park where Rachel was last seen became the focal point of the investigation. Officers searched every inch of its trails, ponds, and wooded areas. Her bright running clothes should have made her easy to spot, but there was nothing. No signs of a struggle, no discarded belongings, no footprints out of place. It was a mystery that left even seasoned investigators baffled. As days turned into weeks, the case grew colder. Rumors swirled through the neighborhood, some speculating she had been kidnapped, others suggesting she had staged her disappearance. The truth, however, remained locked away, hidden in plain sight, waiting for the moment it would finally come to light. To the outside world, Rachel's life looked like something out of a family magazine. Her social media accounts were filled with cheerful pictures of birthday parties, holiday gatherings, and beach trips with her husband and children. Friends described her as dependable, warm, and always present. She was the type of mother who never missed a school event and the type of neighbor who baked extra cookies during the holidays. When she went missing, those photos and memories were the first things people clung to, believing that someone so deeply rooted in her family would never simply walk away. But as detectives sifted through her private life, cracks began to appear in the perfect picture. Interviews with friends revealed that Rachel had recently expressed worries about her marriage. She confided to a close confidant that her husband, Daniel, seemed distant. He often came home late, distracted and defensive about his phone. She wondered if he was hiding something. At the time, her friends brushed off the comments as common marital strain, but after her disappearance, the remarks gained a troubling weight. Daniel presented himself as a grieving husband in the days following Rachel's disappearance, but investigators sensed a detachment that unsettled them. He made statements about his wife in a matter-of-fact tone, as though discussing a colleague rather than the mother of his children. When questioned about her jogging route, he claimed he couldn't remember exactly when she left the house. He also struggled to explain why his car was seen near the park entrance at the same time Rachel would have been jogging. He insisted it was coincidence, saying he often drove by on his way to meetings. Detectives made note of his shifting explanations, aware that inconsistencies often pointed to something deeper. The more they investigated, the more Daniel's carefully polished image began to tarnish. He had built a reputation as a successful financial advisor, the kind of man who wore tailored suits and smiled confidently at community events. Clients trusted him with their savings, and neighbors admired his apparent success. But money leaves trails, and detectives following the financial records began to notice troubling discrepancies. Bank statements showed withdrawals that didn't match his reported income. Credit card bills revealed expensive dinners, hotel stays, and purchases that Rachel's family claimed she never knew about. At the same time, surveillance footage from a gas station near the park revealed Daniel's car circling the area the morning Rachel disappeared. He had not mentioned making any stops that day. To investigators, it raised the question of whether he had been monitoring her movements. The suspicion was still only a shadow, with no physical evidence linking him to a crime, but the foundation of Rachel's supposedly perfect life was unraveling. Behind the bright photos and family outings was a growing sense that something darker had been lurking in her home. Detectives began to believe that Rachel may have discovered secrets that placed her in danger, secrets that would soon come to light in devastating ways. As detectives pressed deeper into Daniel's life, they uncovered layers of deception that painted a disturbing picture. At first glance, he had seemed like a man who had it all together, a respected financial advisor with a comfortable home, a well-kept family, and an image of reliability. Yet the deeper investigators looked, the more his carefully built world began to crumble. Bank records revealed transfers into accounts that Rachel had no knowledge of, accounts tucked away under false names and shell companies. These weren't minor oversights or small savings plans. The sums were enormous, moving quietly from client accounts into his personal control. It was the kind of fraud that could ruin him if exposed, and Rachel, as his spouse, might have started piecing the truth together. The financial secrecy wasn't the only part of his double life. Detectives traced luxury purchases, jewelry, designer clothing, and first-class travel that had no place in the Torres family budget. They soon linked these indulgences to a woman in another city. She appeared in records under different names, hotel reservations, airline tickets, and large wire transfers. When investigators questioned her, she admitted to a relationship with Daniel. She said she believed he was separated from his wife and free to pursue her. The revelation shocked Rachel's friends and family, but it gave investigators a motive that had been missing. If Rachel had discovered his affair and his fraud, she could have destroyed both his family life and his career. Detectives now understood why Rachel had seemed uneasy in the weeks before her disappearance. Friends recalled that she had been distant, sometimes distracted during conversations, as if carrying a heavy burden she couldn't share. One friend remembered her saying she was ready to make a change, but never explained what that meant. Investigators theorized she might have confronted Daniel, or at the very least gathered enough evidence to question him. The more investigators studied Daniel, the more they recognized a man who lived on control. He had built a public life filled with admiration, a private one filled with secrets, and a hidden one filled with lies. If Rachel had threatened to dismantle that structure, he would have viewed it as the collapse of everything he had worked to maintain. Detectives believed this pressure, combined with the risk of his fraud being exposed, may have pushed him to a breaking point. By the time investigators assembled this picture, suspicion of Daniel was no longer a whisper, it was becoming the central theory of the case. Still, they lacked the most critical piece: physical proof that Rachel was gone because of him. Without a body, they couldn't prove murder. Without a murder, they couldn't explain why a woman so deeply tied to her children would abandon them. For all their suspicions, the case remained caught in limbo, balanced between circumstantial evidence and undeniable intuition. What investigators didn't know yet was that the truth lay buried only a few miles away, waiting for chance to bring it to the surface. The case broke open unexpectedly when a hiker set out on a remote canyon trail a few miles from the Torres family home. The area was rugged and rarely visited, a place where the thick brush and uneven ground discouraged casual visitors. While moving through the undergrowth, the hiker noticed something unusual: a patch of earth that seemed disturbed, covered with branches and leaves arranged in a way that did not appear natural. Out of curiosity, he stepped closer, and a faint smell rising from the soil confirmed his fears. Authorities were called, and within hours the canyon was swarming with investigators in protective suits. What they uncovered changed the case forever. Beneath the shallow grave lay Rachel's body, partially decomposed but still identifiable by dental records and clothing. The discovery ended weeks of uncertainty and shattered the hope that she might still be alive. Forensic experts began a careful recovery, documenting every detail of the site. They noted the hurried nature of the burial, the soil uneven, the covering materials hastily gathered. It spoke of desperation rather than careful planning. When Rachel's body was examined, the evidence told a clear story. She had been killed on the same morning she disappeared, her injuries consistent with blunt force trauma. There were no defensive wounds, which suggested she had been caught off guard, likely attacked by someone she trusted. Dirt and plant material embedded in her clothing linked directly to the canyon soil, leaving little doubt she had been transported there shortly after her death. Investigators compared fibers and traces found on Rachel S. clothing with samples taken from Daniel S. car. The results were damning. Fibers from the trunk lining matched exactly, as did soil particles from the canyon. Despite his earlier claims, it became clear that his car had been used to move her body. For detectives, this was the missing link that connected suspicion to reality. The image of a grieving husband collapsed instantly, replaced by that of a man who had killed his wife and tried to erase her existence. The canyon site revealed more subtle details as well. Tire impressions near the burial ground matched the make and model of Daniel's vehicle. Though weather and erosion had degraded them, enough similarities remained to strengthen the case. Phone records placed him in the vicinity at the exact time investigators believed Rachel was buried. Each piece of evidence built upon the other, forming a chain too strong to ignore. When the news of Rachel's discovery reached the community, grief turned into outrage. People who had once offered Daniel sympathy now looked at him with disgust. Friends and neighbors who had rallied for his family felt betrayed, realizing they had been supporting the very man responsible for the tragedy. Prosecutors moved swiftly, charging Daniel with murder. What had started as a mystery of a missing mother was now a confirmed homicide, backed by physical proof. The shallow grave in the canyon had exposed the truth Daniel fought so hard to conceal. The secret life he built, the lies he spun, and the perfect image he tried to maintain had all collapsed in the most public and devastating way. The trial of Daniel Torres drew enormous attention, transforming a once ordinary family tragedy into a headline case that gripped the state. Journalists filled the courtroom each morning, and cameras lined the courthouse steps. The public wanted answers, and prosecutors were determined to provide them. They painted Daniel not as the successful family man he portrayed himself to be, but as a man living a dangerous double life, one that came crashing down the moment his wife threatened to expose it. The prosecution laid out their case methodically. Jurors were shown the financial records, first hidden accounts, fraudulent transfers, and unexplained withdrawals that demonstrated greed and deception. Then came the evidence of his affair, established through receipts, hotel records. and testimony from the other woman who admitted she had been led to believe Daniel was separated. This narrative of betrayal and deceit laid the foundation for motive, but what truly sealed the prosecution's argument was the forensic evidence. Scientists explained in detail how fibers from Daniel's car matched those on Rachel's clothing, how the soil in the trunk aligned with samples from the burial site, and how his phone records placed him at the canyon at the exact time her body was concealed. Witnesses testified about Rachel's growing unease in the weeks before she vanished. Friends recalled her suspicions about Daniel's activities and her desire to make a change in her life. The implication was clear. Rachel knew too much, and Daniel feared exposure. Prosecutors argued that his financial empire would have collapsed if his wife went public with the truth, and the shame of losing his family and reputation drove him to commit the ultimate act of violence. The defense attempted to counter by suggesting alternative theories. They implied that Rachel may have encountered someone else on her jog, that the evidence tying Daniel to the crime was circumstantial, and that investigators had built a narrative without exploring other suspects. But the weight of the physical proof, combined with his suspicious behavior and inconsistencies during questioning, left jurors skeptical. The shallow grave, the fibers, and the surveillance footage formed an undeniable chain that the defense struggled to break. As closing arguments were delivered, the atmosphere in the courtroom was tense. Family members of Rachel sat silently, clutching tissues, their grief now mingled with the hope of justice. The jury deliberated for only 2 days before returning with their verdict, guilty of first-degree murder. Daniel Torres, once admired as a polished professional, was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The ruling brought a sense of closure to Rachel's loved ones, though it could never erase the pain of her loss. In the aftermath, the case became a cautionary tale. Community members who had once admired Daniel now spoke of him as a warning about the dangers of hidden lives and unchecked deceit. Rachel's story was shared widely, a reminder of how quickly appearances can collapse when secrets fester beneath the surface. For her children, her legacy remained not the tragic way she died, but the loving, steady presence she had been during her life, a presence stolen by a man consumed with protecting his lies at all costs.